Hey everyone, Sarah Kay here. You might recognize my voice from the AniQuest podcast. Okay, maybe not. Probably not. Oh, come on! Anyway, I've had this channel for a while, so I figured it's about time to start using it. And for my first video, the topic will be Netflix, specifically how they appeal to the anime fan community through their content, and how they have used anime to reach a wider audience outside of the fan community, including international audiences and how they're learning. And then finally, we will end with some pros and cons, what I feel Netflix has done well, and what I feel like they really need some improvement on. With that said, let the show begin. Part 1. You may not know this, but Netflix has a pretty long history in terms of providing anime content. Not convinced? Well, let's travel back, way back, very far back, to 1997. This year is of particular importance because this was actually when Netflix actually first founded as a company and launched their DVD rental service. Psh, DVD? Back then it was all about the VHS and Laserdiscs, y'all.
Can you never do that again?
Anyway, one thing that the very few anime fans who used this service noticed was that there was actually quite a surprising amount of anime content available. Now, before I continue, I do want to remind you that this information is almost 20 years old, so it was pretty hard for me to find some actual facts online. So, a lot of what I'm telling you regarding Netflix's older library is from word of mouth. That said, however, a friend of mine was actually kind enough to send me this picture of one of his older anime DVDs, because he knew it still had the Netflix insert. So, as you can see by this picture, Netflix did at least see some potential in marketing towards anime fans. But, as I'm sure you can imagine, this program did not do very well. I'm willing to bet that a lot of you didn't even know this existed. And I'm willing to bet that even more of you did not know that this was still around. Like I said before, this service actually had a very surprising amount of anime content. Seriously, if I wasn't like 4 years old at the time, and if it had been available in Canada, and if my parents had actually bought an account, I would have freaked out. From here, fast forward to the year 2007 when Netflix first launched its streaming service. In the US. See, Netflix didn't come here to Canada until 2010. Seriously, Netflix has only been available here for 6 years. But when Netflix actually finally did come out around here, my family was actually one of the first to buy an account. And I was so freaking excited. I had just finished watching my official gateway anime, Yu Yu Hakusho, and I was ready for a taste of more. I had heard that there was a lot of fantastic anime. So I logged on, and what did I find? Absolutely nothing. I mean, don't get me wrong, they certainly had anime, but their selection was really sparse and varied. It was really kind of weird. Just so you know what the selection was like, let me just list a few right here. Fruits Basket, Ouran High School Host Club, Blast Rider, which is so obscure that odds are none of you have ever even heard of it, unless you are the most hardcore of fans. And yet, for some reason, even though this was such an obscure anime, and still is today, it was one of the most advertised things I saw on Netflix streaming at the time. Witchblade, and, I kid you not, Master of Martial Arts. Now, if you don't know what Master of Martial Arts is, I implore you, please do not look it up. Your soul will thank you. I just really didn't get it though. There was a ton of anime on their DVD service, like a really unusual amount. And then, why did they not have that on their streaming service? But then it hit me. They were probably just really cheap licenses that they only picked up just because they couldn't get anything else. But it was different to them with their streaming service. Yeah, it took a while for it to take off, at least it did here. In fact, there was a while where it didn't look like it was going to take off at all. But it was pretty clear that they were going to be more selective on what they streamed, because this was the thing that they really wanted to succeed. To back up my point, I found this quote from NewRepublic.com in an article called Netflix's War on Mass Culture by Tim Wu. Claiming network status was also a bold move for Netflix, just based on its track record alone. Not so long ago, it was a struggling DVD rental company whose cachet was from its distinctive red envelopes and pretty good website. One wonders how much the shift really was planned, a question on which Hastings and Chief Content Officer Ted Sarandos disagree. When I met Reed in 1999, Sarandos told me, as in he told Tim Wu, part of our first conversations were about the potential for original programming. Hastings demurs, calling that generous. What was planned all along was really just the evolution to streaming, he says, and that's the name of the company, Netflix, not DVD by mail. End of quote. So, although it can for sure still be debated, it would seem that, at first, Netflix valued getting their content to people. The actual quality of the content, however, was just an afterthought until the technology for streaming had improved. And when, of course, they actually had the money to do so. But in the meantime, they had to start with their ever-struggling DVD service, in which they just filled it up with whatever they could get, regardless of the actual quality of the product. Now, I'm also going to go on a little bit of a side note here and say that there's probably a huge difference between DVD distribution licensing and licenses for streaming distribution. This would be a huge indicator as to why their anime selection on their DVD rental service is still a lot bigger than what's available on their streaming service, and why a lot of the animes that used to be on their streaming service are now DVD rental only. Let's take Funimation as a different example. When it comes to disc distribution, they can only distribute in the US and Canada. In the case of their website, however, people in the US are freely available to stream their shows, but those in Canada cannot view them. So this would have to mean that streaming rights tend to extend to a smaller geographical area than disc rights do. Which would also explain why a lot of the content that's available in the US Netflix and Canadian Netflix can vary quite a bit. On that subject, we did eventually get a VPN in the house, and it was awesome. We've got Black Butler, Spice and Wolf, freaking Angel Beats. But in my excitement, I eventually watched through everything that was good on Netflix in less than a year. And then when I was done, I was pretty much stuck with nothing to watch. Until... Part 2. Okay, so before we continue, I just wanted to point out a little experiment I performed. I started off by listing all of the animes I had watched on Netflix, which turned into a total of 79 titles. Now, of course, I'm not going to put you through that. I'm not going to list them all here because that would just take way too long. But basically, my next step was to find out which of these anime was still on Netflix. And after going through the list of all animes that I either completed, on hiatus, or dropped, there were only 26 titles left. That just blows my mind. That just proves how much they are paying attention to what they're uploading. There's always the possibility that they just lost licenses, and of course that happens. The fact that they have such a small list now proves that they are figuring out this very specific demographic they want to target. Now, unfortunately, this isn't super precise because my VPN doesn't work anymore. But as far as I can tell, their anime uploads in between countries have been pretty consistent in the last couple of years, so it shouldn't be too different. And now, let's fast forward again by 3 years or so, when... April 7th, 2013, the day that Attack on Titan premiered across the world. Oh hell yeah! Originally broadcast in Japanese and subtitled for streaming on Crunchyroll and Funimation.com, this show was a massive hit. It had everything. Blood, a revenge plot, and people being eaten by giant humanoid monsters. This series, along with Sword Art Online, pretty much made simulcast one of the mainstays for anime. This thing got so popular that even before it was dubbed, it was very hard to be alive on the internet and not hear about it at least once. And it was becoming so popular that even people who didn't like watching subbed anime were encouraged to check it out. This is exactly what happened to me. I'd heard about the series by so many people that I just had to check it out. I went on Crunchyroll for the very first time, watched it free with subs, and that's what got me hooked. Not too long after that, I bought myself an account and never looked back. Now, why do they bring this up? Because in January 2014, only 4 months after the end of the Japanese airing, Netflix uploaded Attack on Titan in its entirety subtitled on Netflix. Now, at this point, you've got to understand that this was really unusual for Netflix at the time. Everything on Netflix was at least a year old before they even uploaded it, so this was the first time we'd ever got something brand new this fast. Just to further get my point across about how it is that this show was able to become so popular, I would like to read a quote from Chuck Tryon in his essay On Demand Culture. He writes, "Movie and television watching continue to be defined as social activities to be shared with friends and family or, in the case of movie theaters, a wider public. As Charles Ackland has noted, discourses on moviegoing have long emphasized the material and sensory experience of commune, and opening weekends are particularly identified with the pleasurable opportunity to be with strangers and to be part of the crowd. Similarly, television watching has long been identified with a wide range of social activities, such as watching with family or friends and discussing the show afterwards. In this regard, social media tools have begun to play a vital role in promoting collective viewing activities that allow viewers to identify movies and television shows they want to see and to discuss those texts with others. At the same time, social media can be used to promote movies and even to structure the cultures of anticipation associated with films and television shows." End quote. So, as I've been saying, this is exactly the experience that I had. I was talking with people on Facebook and other forums, and the show was just constantly being praised online. And it was because of my time spent in social media that I was exposed to this show. And really, on a related note, when you're an anime fan, anime is not broadcast on TV very often, so social media is really our only outlet for discovering things that we may want to watch or discuss. And this is something that Netflix has been very aware of in the last couple of years regarding any element of culture. They're constantly connecting themselves to social media. They are on Twitter, they have a Facebook page, you can link your Netflix account to Facebook, people are always tweeting about their favorite Netflix shows and so forth. They are really using social media for its advertising potential. And this is why I feel that this is a quote that is best to bring up here, because this show was so predominant in anime related social media that there was absolutely no way that they could have not noticed this, because it was to the point that this series was mainstream. This series became incredibly popular, and it only made sense for this show to actually gain Netflix's attention through social media. Then, in December 2013, Netflix announced that they had acquired the exclusive rights to stream Knights of Sidonia, which would begin airing in Japan in April 2014. They also stated that the series would be available subtitled, but that a dub would also be produced, and, kind of surprisingly, the dub actually had well-known anime voice actors like Johnny Young Bosch, Todd Haberkorn, and so forth. This was actually going to be amazing. Now, you might be wondering, why did I bring up both of these shows together? Well, here's the plot to Attack on Titan. Hundreds of years ago, mankind was brought to the brink of extinction by a race of giant monsters known as Titans. As the Titans take over the Earth, humanity has been forced to gather in a small, secluded area protected by several layers of walls. Humanity has been safe for 100 years, until one day the outer wall is breached. In desperation, Eren Yeager must use his powers, which seem to be mysteriously linked to the Titans, and fight alongside his comrades in the Survey Corps to defeat the Titan threats. And now, here's the plot to Knights of Sidonia. Thousands of years ago, mankind was brought to the brink of extinction by a race of giant alien monsters known as the Ghana. As the Ghana destroy the Earth, humanity has been forced to live in outer space within the seed ships that they originally used to escape. Mankind was safe for 1,000 years until the Ghana suddenly attacked once more. At this time, a man named Nagate Tanikaze emerges from the ship's underground. Equipped with some mysterious abilities that seem to be linked to the Ghana, he will fight with humanity's military forces to help eliminate the Ghana threat. Yeah, Netflix knew exactly what they were doing when they licensed this one. I mean, it's like 2 sentences away from being Attack on Titan's exact plot. Just to make sure of this, I went on Netflix and checked the recommendations for Attack on Titan, and sure enough, Knights of Sidonia shows up. In addition to this, I do have another theory as to why this was picked to be Netflix's first exclusive license. This actually reminds me of the circumstances around which Netflix decided to produce House of Cards. Now, House of Cards had had a pretty hard time getting picked up, and then Netflix came along and agreed to not only produce the show, but guaranteed a second season. And because there would be less episodes than a typical first season, it would be fairly low budget. And this really seems to be the case in some form with Knights of Sidonia. I can't find an exact budget because there isn't really all that much available information about this show, but you can see on screen that it was a fairly low budget series. The second season was actually announced right after the airing of the last episode of the first season, so it's pretty safe to say that the second season was greenlit fairly early on, if not greenlit before the first episode of the first season even aired. So it's just a very similar situation to House of Cards. It really seems like Netflix values these kinds of shows, these little show that could kind of shows, that they feel really deserve a chance. And honestly, if it weren't for Netflix, with this being a computer generated series, those don't do well here typically. So if it weren't for Netflix, this show would not have even been licensed, and it would not have made nearly as much money here as it has with Netflix being the one to license it. In the year 2014, it was announced that the popular manga The Seven Deadly Sins would be adapted into an anime. As the air date drew closer, nobody seemed to be claiming it. The season finished airing in Japan, and, well, we still had nobody licensing it. Then, in February of 2015, Variety magazine announced that Netflix would be launching in Japan in the fall. This launch finally happened on September 2nd. Then, on September 28th of 2015, Anime News Network released an article stating that Netflix Japan had listed the Seven Deadly Sins. Not only that, but it had actually been listed with an English title, in spite of the fact that it was only going to be available in Japanese. This really caused the rumors to take off. And then, finally, on November 9th, 2015, we got our answer. Anime News Network announced that Netflix had listed The Seven Deadly Sins in English. Much like Knights of Sidonia, the series was to be dubbed and subtitled in English. So the big question here, I guess, is why did Netflix hold off on announcing this acquisition for so long when Knights of Sidonia was announced long before the series even began airing? It would seem that the series was actually a sort of device that they used to open in Japan. Part 4, The Future. In November 2015, Anime News Network reported that Netflix planned to eventually start producing their own anime. They write, Netflix CEO Reed Hastings stated in an interview with the New York Times journalist Andrew Ross Sorkin at the DealBook conference on Tuesday that he is hopeful that Netflix will make a great anime show. Take that as you will, but I think that's a pretty big confirmation that they plan to eventually start making their own anime. In addition to this past January, only 4 months after launching in Japan, Netflix launched worldwide. And just something I found interesting, here's a quote from the Netflix press release. From today onwards, we will listen and we will learn, gradually adding more languages, more content, and more ways for people to engage with Netflix, said Hastings. We're looking forward to bringing great stories from all over the world to people all over the world. So this seems very reminiscent to what I was mentioning earlier about them connecting with their fans through social media and so forth. Social media is the best way that they can stay in contact with their fans and listen to what they want. And it seems that they have said this many times that they listen to what people want. Part 5. The pros and cons. Let's start off with the pros, and then we'll get to the good stuff, to the very meat that I want to go out on. Pro 1. Netflix has begun to work more closely with other companies in the anime industry. This includes Japanese companies like Polygon Pictures, who made Knights of Sidonia, Toei Animation, who made Glitter Force, we will get to that, and A1 Pictures, and they have even developed relationships with North American companies, particularly Funimation and Aniplex of America. They get a lot of new titles from both Funimation and Aniplex USA. More so in the case of Aniplex USA. This may have something to do with their connection to A1 Pictures, as both A1 Pictures and Aniplex of America are subsidiaries of Aniplex, a company based in Japan. So basically, Netflix has a lot of Aniplex titles. Most recently, they even started streaming the subbed and dubbed versions of Your Lie in April, even before the disc release. Bottom line is that Netflix's willingness to play with others means a lot more content for us. Pro 2. Not only are they providing more content to hardcore fans, but they are also making anime available on a mainstream service, and therefore, by making anime more widely available, they are increasing the likelihood that someone who is not too familiar with anime to be exposed to anime for the first time, and therefore bringing more money into the industry, bringing more people into the fandom, and essentially helping more content to be created for the fandom. Pro 3. Perhaps the best thing is the fact that Netflix is clearly listening to the fans, as I have been stating over and over in this episode. Netflix is well known for interacting with their viewers through social media and so forth, and the fact that they have stated that they will listen to fans even more than they already have in the future is just concrete proof that this is a model that has worked for them, and they are learning from that model, and they are embracing it, they are improving it, they are doing so much better with it. The fact that they have since moved on to licensing and streaming newer anime, both dub and sub, shows they have begun to pay attention to how tastes and the market have evolved. And now we get to the bad parts. The cons. Con 1. Those subtitles look awful. They are so hard to read, especially for someone with like me who has nystagmatism and many other visual problems. They don't have a very good system for adjusting subtitles. Subtitles are always either too small or too big, and you can't really adjust the shading or the coloring enough to make the subtitles stand out more to actually be able to read them. I feel like here they could benefit from observing what Crunchyroll does, because they probably have the best subtitles of any streaming service I've ever seen. Their subtitles are so easy to read. They stick out on the screen and they're not too distracting. You can still focus on the image on the screen. Netflix could benefit from observing what other companies are doing. Con 2. Releasing all of the episodes at the same time. In TV Got Better, Netflix's original programming strategies and binge viewing, Chuck Tryon writes, binge viewing recasts our relationship to televisual time. Often, this desire to binge in the instant mode to drive by a desire for cultural capital to participate through social media such as Twitter, Facebook, and blogging in initial conversations about a series. While it's easy to see that Netflix has benefited greatly from the binge model, this has really only worked well because of the fact that these are shows that are coming from English-speaking countries, and therefore people are experiencing them firsthand. But that's not really how it really works with anime, especially if you're allowing all the episodes to air in Japan before releasing them here. People are going to inevitably seek to watch these shows illegally in fan subs just so that they can have this experience of conversing with others on their social media about the show that they love. And this is quite surprising to me that they're doing this, because it really seemed like they were paying attention to the other anime streaming services, which generally would upload their show 1 hour after the Japanese airing. Because this, of course, allowed people to be more proactive in what was going on currently in the show. They could interact with other people in Japan, possibly, or at the very least interact with each other, and not have the risk of being spoiled by someone who has gone to watch the show illegally. I was really expecting them to follow this model. When I heard that they were going to be streaming Knights of Sidonia, on the day that it was going to start airing in Japan, I actually logged on to Netflix to watch the first episode, so I was very surprised when it wasn't there. I was very disappointed that I could not watch the show at the same time as everyone else, because it was something that I had become so used to by watching Crunchyroll. And I feel like this is something that's really going to discourage people from watching Netflix's shows. Con 3. Netflix is demonstrating some pretty terrible treatments of their children's anime programming. The only one that they have so far is a show which they call Glitter Force. Now, in Japan, the series is actually called Smile Precure. The biggest issue here is who they hired to actually make the dub. Saban. Saban are the people that were responsible for the beloved, but still not very good, Digimon. Now, I absolutely love Digimon, but it was not treated well by Saban. They cut it to pieces just for the sake of localization. It was censored when it really shouldn't have been because it was a children's show to begin with. And this was common practice back in the day, especially with 4Kids and Pokemon and all of the other 4Kids shows and Saban shows. There were a lot of companies that were doing this, but that doesn't make it right. And it's still done today. Saban still edits Digimon, even though in Japan it is intended to be a children's cartoon. When I heard that Netflix was going to be licensing children's anime, I really expected them to be different. If you want an example of just how extreme the censoring was, the episodes in Japan were at about 24 minutes each, and there were 48 episodes total aired in Japan. On the Netflix version, however, episodes are 22 minutes long, and there are only 40 episodes, meaning that 8 episodes were completely cut from the English version. The Japanese uncut versions of these shows are not that bad. There was absolutely no reason for these shows to be censored back then, and there's even less reason for them to be censored now. I was just so surprised that Netflix didn't do something different. I really expected them to be the ones to start not editing these shows, because they've proven in the past that they are trying to listen to their fans, and one of the big things that people complain about is the editing of children's anime. There's a reason that these companies are so criticized by the community, in spite of the fact that they released shows that we actually grew up with. Once again, there's no reason to dumb these shows down for kids. To edit these shows shows an incredible disrespect for the original creators and their intent. Con 4. The biggest offense of Netflix. All of the anime that Netflix has exclusively licensed thus far have been labeled as Netflix originals. This is false advertising of the worst kind. Yes, we have stated before that they are supposed to be aware of the fan base, but they should also be aware of the people who are non-fans. Anybody who sees this and doesn't know any better are not going to pick up on the fact that Netflix did not make these shows. Sure, they list the other creators, but if you're not educated, you could think that's the caterer or something. Like, you have no idea what those mean. And simply by adding that stamp, you are taking credit for something that is not yours. Conclusion. Netflix has performed exceedingly well in the anime community. They have a long way to go, and there are some pretty blatant problems right now, but they can be easily repaired. On the whole, I actually am pretty confident that they will develop some better practices, and hopefully pretty soon they will start allowing us to watch episodes on the same day as they air in Japan. But in the meantime, they're still taking the baby steps necessary to help identify with the anime fan community, and I think that it's a pretty noble cause. Thank you for watching, and before we go, I just want to say a big thank you to my friend Nate Milbank, who was kind enough to send me that picture. I will link below to some general social media information, and you can go and find him, as well as many of my other podcasters with the AniQuest podcast. And while you're there, why don't you go ahead and check out the podcast? You might like it. And I really enjoyed making this video, so who knows, I may even make more. Stay tuned to find out.